Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back again to talk about the healer trinkets and what to coin for the Ny'alotha raid. As you guys are tuning in, Heroic Week is just coming out on North American servers, and with it, we're stocking up on all those coins and looking to see what we want to use them on. So for the first part of the video, I want to go over all of the trinkets available to healers, go over what's good, what's bad, what's ugly, and then we'll move on into what we want to start targeting for our coin rolls overall and more generally speaking. Started off, we're looking at the Humming Black Dragonscale. This is the first trinket that we'll be encountering, and it drops off of Rathian. It also drops for everybody as its Agi strength or intellect, and it comes with a very heavy haste proc. Very heavy uptime, I should say, on that haste proc, right? You'll be able to see, keep in mind for all these tooltips, they're pulled from Wowhead, so you may want to look in-game to see the exact number of int or haste or speed that you'll be receiving. But on PTR, throughout testing this had an uptime of like 70 to 85%. It was almost always up, and you're able to notice it by the telltale wings that sprout out of your back. These wings will also reduce your fall speed, so in case you get knocked up into the air at any time, you'll have a fall speed buff to help you along. Wonderful, right? Overall, this trinket is very similar to the Crest of Paku that we saw out of Battle for Dazara lore, and it has really good uptime. So, Disc Priests out there in particular, even honestly all healers, just having a solid trinket with good stats on it and high uptime is overall a pretty solid option that you will be seeing thus far. So, when you're looking for an easy option, and especially if you're expecting your guild to quickly do normal, heroic, maybe even go on to mythic, expect this trinket to show up a lot on the loot tables because there's very limited options because it's all stretched across 12 bosses. So expect to see these a lot, expect for lots of these to drop. The next trinket that we'll be looking at is from the second or third boss, depending on the order that you select, and it is the Forbidden Obsidian Claw that drops off of Mount. This trinket is incredibly similar to the Carafe of Searing Light that we saw out of Vera Mathras in the Antaurus raid, but a couple differences to keep in mind. Intellect, just like before, this time it's a drain effect, which means not only does it deal damage, but it heals you for damage dealt, as its own basically built-in leech effect, inflicting shadow damage to the enemy and restoring mana to yourself. Now, a couple very interesting things that are going on with this. This scales with haste, which is kind of interesting comparing the last trinket we just looked at, which means that the more haste you have, the more damage it deals, and for the more times it will deal damage, meaning you have a greater overall amount of damage dealt, and of course the more times that you're dealing damage, the more mana that you're restoring to yourself as well. All of these factors together, the self-heal aspect, the very good mana return, which is significantly better than you'd see out of any of the high Mythic Plus kind of Fangs of Intertwined Essence from Temple of Sethralus, right? Gives substantially more mana back than that at similar item level. Expect most every healer to start taking this in some capacity, and if current tuning stays the same, a lot of DPS are already getting buddy-buddy with the healers to try to get this for themselves because of the shadow damage effect as well. So this overall, excellent trinket, and you're going to be wanting to get this very early, about as early as you possibly can. Now, this is not strictly a healer trinket, but it's something that most healers will be able to switch into in order to pursue. It's called the Psyche Shredder, and it drops off Prophet Skitra. And with it, you're going to be able to pump out quite a bit of extra damage, and it's a pretty safe fire and forget. Not too dissimilar from something like Leviathan's Lure, where it's just go about your regular business, and you start dealing some extra shadow damage along the way. Moving on to Il'gynoth, where you have the Oozing Coagulum trinket. This one's very interesting in particular, as it starts spawning large sanguine pools nearby, and it's never underneath your feet, but it's always very close by, and it contains a specific amount of healing. So whenever you stand in it, you continuously make this pool smaller to show how much you're consuming, and it steadily buffs up quite a bit of your healing. It seems that these pools last for, I want to say close to a minute, maybe more. They last for quite a long time, so you can actually build these up, wait till later, and then start standing in them whenever you know there's going to be big incoming damage. Interestingly enough, they also start looking almost exactly like blood pools that you'll see out of a fight like Drestagath, so be very careful whenever you're using this trinket so you know that what is the pool and what's actually a mechanic you should not be standing in at that point. The healing experience I had with this was actually quite high. It did a very large chunk of my overall healing, but it also requires a lot of movement, and whenever you get into a number of these helter-skelter encounters, if you're not using every single pool, if you're not taking advantage of these pools, you're going to quickly drop in value, and it's going to get even more complicated if you're going to be utilizing this on fights where you have to be performing specific mechanics, or as you'll see later on in the raid, when you're basically running from one end of the arena to another constantly, and you can't stop to be standing in a pool for 4 or 5 seconds to churn out that extra bit of healing. It seems like if you are entering it while you have a lot of healing out, it will really quickly prioritize absorbing and soaking up this pool. But again, it's going to have to be damage out onto everybody. And generally speaking, I think this is going to be a trinket that maybe we start utilizing during farm content, or it'll be like a 3rd or 4th type option that we'll go for most healers. As during progression, it just seems like it's going to be very annoying and a lot more challenging to make very good use out of. As we move on to Raden, he drops 2 trinkets, which are also important because they can drop for either the classes. It's all secondary stats that you're going to be getting. So the Vita Charge Titan Shard gives you haste on haste, pretty much. Your spells and abilities have a chance to infuse you with Vita, increasing your haste by X and your party's members' haste by Y. Lasts for 15 seconds. Whereas the Void Twisted Titan Shard is flat versatility, and it shrouds you in Void, giving you an absorption effect. And while that absorption effect persists, on live it's about 80 or 90k HP, or 80 or 90k absorption. Your critical strike is increased by, again, X, while the shroud persists. For this, it really seems like these trinkets are undervalued unless they are combined together, in which case they give you, I believe it's around 1,000 intellect on live servers, or 1,000 primary stats that you'll see on live servers, and they seem to proc quite a lot when you have that 2 set together. There's been a number of points during PTR where they didn't proc properly, or they didn't both proc together when they were supposed to. Some very odd interactions which hopefully have been fixed by this point. That being said, I probably wouldn't end up using these unless they had the proc together, and even still, traditionally a lot of these events and effects where you have to go pick up an orb and you have to go stand in a specific area or spot are usually not that strong during progression, and maybe you'll see some people make some niche use out of it during farm content. But overall, these don't really look like they're going to be a priority for a healing perspective. They have some decent stats to it, but if you look on the side of the Void Twisted Titan Shard, that absorption effect will get consumed very quickly on a number of different encounters, meaning that you have a small amount of healing, and that's fine, but you're far from gaining that full value from the crit strike bonus that you would very much like to. So seems like these are a little understated and would need a little bit more tuning, a little bit more juice in order to take good advantage of. And finally, we have the Manifesto of Madness. This drops off Ny'alotha himself, and with a bonus 10 eye levels that are going to be associated with Carapace and Ny'alotha. So, intellect, and it increases your crit strike by a very large amount, and it's reduced for every ally within 8 yards of you, lasting for 10 seconds. Now, while this ends, your versatility is increased for every ally within 5 yards of you, up to a max of 1130, and that lasts another 10 seconds. So you want to first stay away from everybody to get your big crit strike bonus, and then you want to be able to run in and stand with everybody to maximize your versatility benefit. Now, it's also important to note that the radius of the second half, so the radius of wanting allies around you, is increased based off of your legendary cloak. So that means whenever you have a high enough level, you'll be able to just stand away from everybody a decent distance, at least going to be that 8 yards away, pop the trinket, and stand still as you're dealing damage or healing or what have you, and then you'll naturally have enough range to be within everyone else to get the maximized versatility buff on top of that. For a healing perspective, this seems like a lot of work and a lot of tooltip. Just by and large, there's a lot of stats that are going to be associated with this, but it seems like another delivery system for like Ashara's Font of Power as an example. It seems like another way to just get a whole load of stats at your disposal and start playing around with it in order to take advantage of it. From a healing perspective, playing around with unused trinkets to line up with your burst damage has some niche value, But in this raid, especially when you're going to be focusing on dealing with a lot of the rot damage, the ticking damage, the constant damage that'll be going out, it's less likely that you're going to be getting excellent value of this throughout progression. And for other healers, for example, they might take advantage of this if they're going to be having like large DPS cooldowns around it. Maybe a Holy Pally could utilize this in order to get really good value, really good opener damage, or have like a really strong ramp that would be associated with it. But again, the positional requirements are very elaborate and very annoying to take advantage of, and really to get proper effect out of. So I don't think that we're going to be seeing a ton of this. We might start looking at like caster DPS in particular that'll be pursuing these. But from a healing perspective, if it has enough stats, eventually we'll probably want to go after it. But I think that some of the earlier options in particular will be more desirable. Now this, of course, is going to bring us to the list. And this is, again, specifically for a healing priest. So either disc or holy. We want to start looking at our general priority as to what we want to go after. For Azerite, Carapace and Ny'alotha both drop bonus item level Azerite pieces, and they drop 2 Azerite pieces for every healer. So check with some of your class guides if you're another healer to see if those large pieces have the specific Azerite traits that you want. Most of them are attuned to it, and most of them you're supposed to go after them. So keep that in mind, that if you're able to get through heroic quickly, you're going to want to target Carapace and Ny'alotha for those coin rolls early on. For a priest, you're going to also want to focus on Prophet Skitra for both Holy and Disc, as Holy will be able to take advantage of that Prayerful Litany that Skitra drops, and Discipline will have access to Death Throws, Depth, and a bunch of other options, as well as the usual raid trait in Heart of Darkness, which is present throughout all of those Azerite pieces as well. As I mentioned, the Rathian Trinket and Mount Trinket are especially good for Discipline, and even Holy could take good advantage of the Rathian Trinket. I think that using Coagulum for Holy Priest could see some play, because Holy is very immobile and doesn't have as many instances you'd see at a Disc, especially because Discipline is going to be multi-dotting quite a bit with Purge the Wicked on a lot of these Helter Skelter encounters. But we'll have to see how that starts coming out into play. Keep that in mind. Don't sleep on it. Because while, again, it's a pain to use and standing in any fields to be able to pick up buffs, whether it's stats or bonus healing, is very frustrating, it can prove to be quite powerful. So don't sleep on that one. Now, when we look at weapons, Dark Inquisitor Zanesh has the only, I'd say, relevant weapon that we want to really start focusing on in Vor's Yokal. This is a mace that gives us Void Ritual, which is increasing all of our secondary stats at our disposal. Priest could also start going after a wand, which accelerates cooldown reduction, which might seem a bit of value for a Holy Priest. It might see a bit of value for Holy Priest, but the biggest point to look at for these weapons is, at least on Heroic, you're going to be kind of at the whim of corruption, because while Vor's Yokal and the wand that you'll see later on, those both are always naturally corrupted. Other weapons, like for example the staff off of Raden, those can have random corruption effects as well. So you might actually get a more efficient corruption effect from other weapons later on. Drestagath has a great crit mastery ring for Holy Priest. Ny'alotha has an excellent versatility haste ring, while the Hive Mind has a crit haste ring as well. So that kind of brings us to the general priority that I think most people should look at whenever they're using their coins for the weekly, is that your Ny'alotha Azerite is the most important priority for you to go for. And even though it might mess around for a disc perspective of which piece has Depth of Shadows, which piece has Enduring Luminescence, thankfully those Ny'alotha pieces have a lot of choice and a lot of variety to them. So you might have to have a, say, suboptimal Azerite Forge on it the first time, but then once you can go back and get the Skitra chest, you'll have a lot more advantage later on. Something worth considering is just how many people are going to be needing the Skitra chest, but it's very safe to assume that most people in your raid are going to want the Azerite off of the last 2 bosses, so you're going to want to run both your coins there. And if your group's doing split runs, trying to coin multiple times is incredibly good as well. Trinket-wise, you're probably going to be using them on a Rathian or Maut. Now, there's a bit of options that you have at your disposal there, because they're the first 2 bosses and they're both very easy bosses as well for Mythic. If your guild's going to be progressing more rapidly, if you're confident they're progressing more rapidly, you could look at saving them for an early boss or 2, but keep in mind, coins that are saved until Mythic Week are not benefiting you whenever you're on progression. So waiting that to see if maybe you just want to use those for your early coins when you receive them next week when Mythic Week starts might be a better option, and then you consume all of your 7 coins or all the coins you have at your disposal in Heroic Week, and then later on Mythic Week rolls around and you get 2 more. Weapon-wise, again, Sinesh does drop that strong weapon. Even though the corruption per value is a little inefficient, it still does give you a very good effect. So it's always something worth considering, especially if you, again, start looking at Mythic mode when you're having a higher item level weapon. Priest at the moment does not have a weapon off of Carapace or Ny'alotha, which means we don't benefit from the plus 10 item levels, which means we're not even going after any of those weapons hoping for a Corruption Forge the way we want it. We're kind of just at the whim of whatever the Corruption Forges will get from the rest of the raid. Finally, last on the list, again, this is the priority, so you're focusing on the Azurite first, then Trinkets, then Weapon, then Rings, since it's going to be in Heroic Week, and since we're still kind of at the whim of sockets and the random socketing type effects, or using sockets later on. Rings, you'll usually be able to replace or optimize more easily by going through Mythic Plus farm very heavily, trying your luck, trying to get what you can from those. And if you're able to double up, for example, like Heroic Ny'alotha dropping an excellent ring and excellent Helm Azurite, that's great. But if you're looking for something that's more crit mastery focused, you're going to have to look at how consistently you're killing Drestagath and how that item level is going to compare to just running Mythic Plus over and over and over again to try to get what you need. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys, to the quick video talking about the Trinkets and what to start focusing on and what to start optimizing towards for all of your Ny'alotha needs. There's going to be a lot of boss fights that you're really not going to need much of any loot on. So many boss fights have only like 1 or 2 pieces that you really could go after, and some of those are not even as good. So worth keeping in mind whenever you're looking to min-max your bad luck protection and get that specific piece that you really want off of the boss. For any of the non-priest healers, be sure to check out the Wowhead guys, as all of the other healer specs have their ideal piece list, those recommended piece lists that you can always check out on the guides. And for mine, and for more updates for Holy and Discipline, be sure to check out my guides in the description below, as well as checking out the live stream, as we will be streaming all of our progression and our heroic attempts as we go through the Ny'alotha Waking City. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.